Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time to the sunlit edges of the ancient Mediterranean, where white sails flashed like blades of light and the air shimmered with salt and cedar. Picture it as you lie beneath your blanket, safe and still, but don't be fooled. If you were truly there, the heat could melt your breath and the horizon itself might burn you golden. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a long amber shore. The sea breathes slowly, each wave curling and falling like the sigh of something ancient and patient. The horizon glows faintly, painted with the last gold of a setting sun. It's quiet, not silent, but the kind of quiet that hums with life beneath it. Somewhere inland, a bell rings, its sound fading through the warm air. This is Carthage, a dream carved between desert and sea. The scent of olive oil drifts through the streets, mixed with the sweetness of figs and the salt of the harbor wind. Clay rooftops shimmer, touched by dusk, and the laughter of merchants carries from the lower markets. The sound of sandals on stone echoes gently, not hurried, not loud, but steady, like the rhythm of breathing. You walk through a narrow street, the walls painted in ochre and white, cool to the touch even in the fading heat. Children chase one another around a fountain, shaped like a dolphin, their laughter bouncing off the walls. A woman sells incense from a stall, myrrh, cinnamon, and something faintly floral, like a dream you can almost remember but not name. The air feels thick with memory, as though every stone here has seen too much and decided to keep its secrets. Farther down, the harbor opens wide, and there, under tall masts, the ships of Carthage rest like sleeping giants. Their sails, rolled and bound, bear faint traces of salt and sunlight. Each one carries the mark of distant journeys, to Sicily, to Sardinia, perhaps even beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Carthage was never a city content to stay still. It was always reaching, always listening to the ocean's call. Somewhere, a man repairs a fishing net. His hands move slowly, carefully, threading new rope through worn fibers. He hums a tune you don't recognize, something both sad and comforting. You think about how long this city has been here, breathing in rhythm with the tide. Historians still argue about who founded it, the Tyrians of Phoenicia, or perhaps nameless wanderers whose stories sank beneath the waves. But in the end, maybe it doesn't matter. Every city begins the same way, with someone looking out to sea and wondering what lies beyond. Night begins to fall. Lanterns flicker in the doorways, small orange stars against the gathering blue. The hum of conversation softens into murmurs, then into silence. Somewhere above, on the hill of Barca, a single flame burns, the sacred fire of Baal Hammon, keeper of Carthage's spirit. They say it has never gone out, not even in storms. It glows now like an ember in the city's chest, steady and watchful. You walk toward the temple district, past rows of pillars shaped like trees turned to stone. The air is heavy with incense, and you can almost hear the prayers carried upward like smoke. A priest moves silently across the courtyard, robes brushing against the marble floor. He doesn't look at you, but somehow you feel seen, as if the city itself has opened its eyes. From here, the sea stretches into forever, its edge lost in moonlight. The rising moon casts a pale shimmer across the water, turning the world to silver and quiet breath. Waves murmur against the shore, speaking in a tongue you cannot name, yet somehow you understand. It might be the language of time itself, slow, patient, eternal. The voice that endures when empires fade, keeping their dreams and ruins safe beneath the endless shifting sands. Somewhere in the dark, a fisherman lights a torch at the end of the pier. The flame dances in the wind, reflected 100 times in the rippling surface below. You wonder how many nights like this Carthage has known. How many quiet evenings between one tide and the next, between hope and history. A warm breeze drifts across your face, carrying the taste of salt and ancient whispers. The sea stills, the city quiets, even the stars seem to pause, as if the world itself is waiting. In that fragile hush, you sense something stirring beneath the calm, a heartbeat deep within the earth. It's soft now, almost tender, yet it feels like the beginning of a rhythm that will one day shake empires and awaken history itself. Far away, lightning flickers across the horizon, soft, distant, like the memory of a storm that never came. Somewhere, perhaps, a boy stands on a marble balcony, watching the sea breathe beneath the stars. His eyes are bright, his heart restless, already hearing the call of destiny. But that tale belongs to another night, another turning of the wind. For now, you stand at the edge of history itself. The sand beneath your feet is cool, shaped by centuries of tides. Behind you, Carthage murmurs in the dark, half city, half dream, its walls aglow with the faint light of oil lamps. Before you, the sea stretches vast and eternal, whispering of journeys yet to begin. You close your eyes, and in the hush between waves, you almost feel it, the slow, steady heartbeat of an empire still waiting to rise. The waves return, gentler now, a hush upon the shore, as if the sea itself leans in to whisper its secrets. You listen, and the world seems to breathe with you. The morning in Carthage begins not with noise, but with fragrance. You wake to the scent of cinnamon and crushed myrtle drifting through open shutters. The streets, still damp from the sea breeze, glimmer faintly as sunlight slides over rooftops. Somewhere below, a merchant rolls open a woven mat, setting out jars of oil, their glass catching the dawn. The city stirs slowly, like a cat stretching after a long nap. You step outside and feel the warmth rising from the stone beneath your feet, and for a moment, everything feels eternal. As you wander deeper into the heart of Carthage, you pass narrow lanes where the air hums with quiet work. A silversmith bends over his table, carving the image of Baal-Hamon, the great god of fire and time, onto a pendant no larger than your palm. His hands move in a rhythm learned from his father, who learned it from his own before him. Each line, each mark, carries generations of patience. The silver glints in the morning light, soft and liquid, as if the metal itself remembers the sea. From the workshop, you follow the sound of footsteps up toward the market square. There, women balance baskets of dates and grain on their heads, their dresses fluttering like sails in the wind. A boy sells papyrus scrolls filled with trade records and poems, his voice steady and bored, the way all young merchants sound when they've memorized every word. You hear the faint clang of bronze from a nearby forge, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of the city. Nothing here rushes. Even the sound of labor seems to breathe. Beyond the market lies the temple quarter, where the scent of frankincense thickens the air. You see priests tending to small altars, their robes white as the sea foam that curls beyond the harbor. They sprinkle oil and whisper to the gods, not loudly, but with the kind of confidence that only comes from repetition, a ritual that has never been broken. On the highest terrace of Barca hill, the great flame of Baal burns. It has burned, they say, since the first settlers raised their hands to the heavens and prayed for safe winds. At night, the flame glows like a beacon, a steady pulse of orange in the dark. Sailors returning home from the far edges of the Mediterranean steer by its light. It's said that even storms part around it, unwilling to challenge the god it honors. And yet, standing at its base, you feel no fear, only calm. The fire doesn't roar. It hums. Its warmth doesn't sting. It wraps gently, like a shawl pulled close on a cool evening. Some say that if you listen closely, the flame whispers the names of those who once kept it alive. You find a quiet spot near the temple steps, where a group of old men sit beneath an olive tree. They speak softly of trade routes and weather patterns, their fingers tracing maps in the dust. One of them, his beard white and his eyes cloudy, tells a story of the first woman who saw this shore, a princess named Elissa, fleeing from Tyre. He says she brought with her the fire of her homeland, carried across the waves in a clay lamp. That, he nods toward the hill, is the same flame. Historians, of course, still debate who truly founded Carthage, but legends have a way of feeling more real than records. You continue through the city, and the streets grow quieter as the day ripens. The sound of waves fills the spaces between buildings. The walls are painted with patterns of palms and spirals, symbols meant to ward off bad fortune. You pass a courtyard where women dye fabrics in great clay vats, their hands stained blue and green. A cat naps in the shade nearby, its tail flicking lazily. Everything seems touched by sunlight, not harshly, but like gold leaf brushed across time itself. By afternoon, the heat deepens and Carthage slows. Merchants close their awnings. The air hums with cicadas, their rhythms steady and hypnotic. You find shelter beneath a fig tree and watch as shadows lengthen, stretching across the mosaic floors and marble steps. Even the harbor seems to doze. Ships drift gently, their hulls creaking like old wooden sighs. The sea, always just within reach, glitters softly, promising both wealth and distance. As twilight deepens, lamps bloom one by one, weaving golden threads through Carthage's winding streets. Soft laughter drifts with the scent of spice and salt. Music hums from distant courtyards, gentle and timeless. Beneath the starlit sky, stories rise like smoke, echoes of journeys that never truly end. The city feels alive, yet suspended, as if it exists between two heartbeats of the universe. You wander back toward the harbor, where the last colors of the sunset melt into the sea. Fishermen tie up their boats, and the scent of salt grows sharp again. Somewhere, someone laughs, the sound echoing faintly before fading into the rhythm of the waves. Above it all, the flame of Barca burns steady. Its light trembles slightly in the wind, but never wavers. They say that as long as that fire burns, Carthage will endure. And even though centuries have passed and empires have risen and fallen, tonight in this story, that flame still glows, silent, unwavering, eternal. You sit for a while, listening to the sea, watching the reflection of the fire ripple across the water. The city breathes around you, calm and slow, and for a brief moment, you forget the world beyond this shore. The sound of the waves becomes softer now, almost like a lullaby. The air cools, scented faintly with oil and ash. Somewhere in the dark, a ship bell rings once, low and distant, marking the hour. You close your eyes, and the light of the eternal flame flickers gently behind them. The city of silent flames hums quietly, holding its secrets, its legends, and its dreams. You take a slow breath, and it feels like breathing with history itself, warm, patient, and infinite. The evening in Carthage was tender and still. The gardens of the Barca estate lay quiet beneath a silver moon, their olive leaves glistening like tiny mirrors in the night breeze. The air smelled faintly of cypress and whetstone. Somewhere beyond the hills, a sea whispered its long, unbroken song, the same sound that had carried Carthaginian ships to every corner of the world. Tonight, though, it was not a song of trade or travel. It was a song of something yet to come. In the garden, a boy sat beside his father. Hannibal was 10, but his eyes carried a depth uncommon for his age, dark, steady, and curious, like two pools that reflected both the firelight and the moon above. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was a man shaped by war, broad-shouldered, silent, and calm, in a way that came from standing too often between life and death. Yet in this quiet hour, he was simply a father watching his son trace patterns in the dust. The faint sound of cicadas filled the space between their breaths. A small lamp flickered beside them, casting soft gold across the boy's face. The night stretched wide and silent, broken only by the soft murmur of the waves. Hamilcar stood beside his son, eyes fixed on the horizon where sea and sky became one. The air was heavy with salt and memory. Somewhere in that stillness, the faint rhythm of the water seemed to carry a message, a reminder that nothing is ever truly forgotten. Hannibal listened, sensing what his father did not need to say. The sea remembered everything. He lifted his gaze toward the dark expanse where the Mediterranean touched the stars. Somewhere beyond that invisible line lay Rome, distant, powerful, waiting. He felt its presence like thunder held just beyond the edge of sound. In the days that followed, life in the Barca household continued with calm precision. Servants moved softly through the courtyards, their footsteps muffled on the marble floors. His mother tended the orange trees and left small offerings at the family shrine each morning: a cup of milk, a sprig of thyme, a whisper for protection. Hannibal watched her with fascination, sensing that every act, no matter how gentle, carried weight. His father, however, was rarely still. Hamilcar was a soldier of Carthage, commander of armies, defender of distant lands, a man who had fought against Rome and returned not in triumph, but in resolve. When he was home, he rose before dawn to study maps spread across wide cedar tables. Hannibal often sat beside his father, tracing his small fingers along maps inked with black coastlines. The parchment smelled faintly of smoke and salt, like a memory of distant voyages. Each mark told a story: Sardinia's rough shores, the stone paths of Sicily, the sunburnt ridges of Hispania. Those were places carved from struggle, whispered through generations. He listened as his father worked, not to words, but to the rhythm of the quill, the sigh of the wind through the open window, the pulse of the waves below. Slowly, he began to understand the quiet lessons of the sea, how stillness could be strength, how patience could be sharper than steel. The sea spoke of endurance, of waiting for the right wind to rise. And Hannibal listened. But one night would linger longer than all the rest. The moon hung low, and the stars seemed to draw close, as if curious about what was about to unfold. Down by the water's edge, father and son stood before a small stone altar, warm with the day's fading heat. The scent of cedar smoke clung to the air. Hamilcar placed his hand upon the boy's shoulder, and the silence between them felt ancient, older than war, older even than grief. There, beneath the moon's pale gaze, the child understood what words could not teach. He felt the weight of his father's sorrow, the quiet ache of a city that had once burned and rebuilt itself from ash. And in that moment, he made his vow, not to conquer, not to hate, but to remember. When he raised his eyes to the horizon, the sea shimmered like tempered glass, holding both peace and storm within its depths. Some say that as he spoke, a gust of wind rose from the sea, carrying the scent of salt and ash. Others believe the flame at the temple on Barca flickered wildly that night, as if the gods themselves had turned to listen. Historians still debate whether the oath was truth or legend. Yet every myth begins with a seed of truth, and that truth is this: from that night on, the name Hannibal no longer belonged to a child, but to destiny itself, carried forward by time's unyielding hand. The next morning, the garden was quiet again. Birds sang, the air shimmered with sunlight, and the world seemed unchanged. But Hamilcar knew. He watched his son walk along the colonnade, tracing the carved lions on the pillars with gentle fingers. There was no pride in his eyes, only the quiet understanding that something had begun, something that would stretch beyond their lives, beyond the city, beyond even the sea. Years later, people would speak of Hannibal Barca as a commander, a strategist, a force of nature. But long before the battles, before the elephants and the Alps, he was simply a boy in a silent garden, listening to the sea and carrying a promise too vast for his age. And in that stillness, between the stars, the waves, and the sleeping city, Carthage itself seemed to hold its breath. The fire on Barca hill burned steady, reflecting in the water below, as if watching over the oath that would shape centuries to come. That night, the wind was soft. The sea murmured its secrets to the shore, and the moon glowed pale above the gardens of the Barca estate. A boy sat beside his father once more, both silent, both dreaming, one of peace, the other of destiny. From the harbor of Carthage, dawn broke like a slow whisper across the water. The sea was calm, unnaturally calm, its glassy surface reflecting the soft gold of the rising sun. Ships lined the shore in rows that seemed endless, wooden hulls dark with pitch, sails furled tight against the wind, the scent of salt and cedar heavy in the morning air. Men moved quietly among them, soldiers, craftsmen, handlers, each performing his duty with unspoken precision. It was not the rush of battle that filled the air, but the quiet weight of purpose. On the stone quays, elephants stood tethered beside piles of grain and amphorae, their silhouettes framed against the soft mist. Their eyes blinked slowly, patient, unaware of the journey that lay ahead. Horses stamped and snorted, their breaths clouding the morning light. Bronze armor caught the sun in glimmers, like sparks dancing on the surface of still water. Hannibal walked among them, his pace steady, his expression unreadable. He paused beside a group of mapmakers, their wax tablets spread across a low table. The smell of melted beeswax mingled with oil and parchment. He leaned in, his fingertips tracing the faint grooves carved into the surface. The contours of mountains, the flow of rivers, the delicate curve of the Italian coast. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every man there knew that something immense was about to begin, though none could quite name it. Behind him, the city stirred awake. Carthage, with its red-tiled roofs and terraced gardens, watched from the hillsides as her sons prepared to leave. The cries of gulls echoed faintly between the temples, where priests offered quiet prayers to Baal and Tanit, burning small bundles of myrrh and laurel. The smoke rose slowly into the soft morning sky, curling above the city like a veil. And yet, beneath that peace, something moved, a current deep and unseen, the stirring of a destiny too vast for any one man to command. In the inner harbor, Hannibal's flagship awaited, sleek, dark, its prow carved in the likeness of a lion's head. The wood gleamed with fresh oil, and the faint scent of pine drifted from its deck. Nearby, officers stood in quiet conversation, their voices low, their faces lit by the warm light of the rising day. Hannibal joined them, but spoke little. He had inherited not only his father's command, but also his silence. Where others saw the promise of glory, he saw only the long shadow of duty, and the calm before a storm that would stretch across empires. The preparations went on for days. The sound of hammer on wood, of ropes tightening, of grain sacks being lifted onto ships, became a kind of rhythm, steady, meditative, almost ritualistic. At night, the harbor glowed faintly under the light of torches. Fishermen watched from their small boats offshore, murmuring prayers for safe passage. No one knew exactly where the fleet was bound. Some whispered of Spain, others of Sardinia, and a few dared to utter the word Italy in tones half fearful, half reverent. Historians still debate whether Hannibal truly intended to invade Italy from the start, or if his campaign was merely a response to the upheavals following his father's death. Yet on quiet nights, when he stood on the harbor, eyes fixed on the sea, it is said one could sense in him something beyond political calculation. An ancient oath renewed, taking form in deeds alive, in the unwavering resolve it would shape history itself. He would often stand alone at the edge of the quay, the soft sound of waves breaking against stone beneath him. The torches cast long shadows across his face. The stars shimmered above the harbor, cold, patient witnesses to the plans of men. The breeze carried the smell of tar and fig leaves, and in the distance, bells from the city temples rang in low, mournful tones. Somewhere, a child sang to herself, her voice faint but clear, floating down from the hills, a song of farewell that wove itself into the night air like a thread of light. Hannibal closed his eyes and listened. It was not the sound of war that he heard, but of memory, his father's voice, the sea, the vow whispered under moonlight. And though no word passed his lips, the silence around him seemed to hum with meaning. By morning, the fleet began to move. The first ships slipped from the harbor one by one, their oars dipping into the still water in perfect rhythm. The sun rose higher, glinting off bronze helmets, off the backs of elephants swaying gently on the decks of the larger transports. Drums beat softly, not in triumph, but in cadence with the sea. From the terraces above, the citizens of Carthage watched in silence. Mothers held their children, priests raised their hands in blessing, and the city seemed to hold its breath. The sails unfurled, white against the blue expanse, catching the first full wind of morning. Slowly, the fleet turned toward the horizon, toward the unknown. For a long time, the people watched until the ships became small points of light, merging with the shimmer of the sun on the water, and then it was only stillness. The sea that had once carried the merchants of Carthage to distant lands now carried her warriors and her hopes toward a destiny that no one could yet name. By the time the last vessel disappeared beyond the curve of the earth, the wind had shifted. Clouds gathered faintly over the water, their edges glowing with sunlight. The harbor, emptied of its ships, seemed vast and silent, its stillness heavy but peaceful, like the world holding its breath before rain. That evening, as the sun sank behind Barca hill, the flames at the temple were lit again. They burned quietly against the twilight sky, steady and watchful, as if the gods themselves had turned their gaze toward the west, following the path of the departing sails. Far beyond the distant horizon, a storm gathered in silence, its presence unseen but inevitable, waiting patiently to awaken and reshape everything in its path. The mountains rose like frozen waves, their peaks lost in mist and snow. You walk with the army now, your boots crunching softly over frost and stone. The wind hums through narrow passes, carrying the faint sound of horns and distant footsteps. Thousands of men, their shapes half swallowed by the white world around them. It feels less like a march than a dream unfolding in slow motion, the rhythm of breath and movement blending into the cold silence of the Alps. The air is thin here, clear as glass and sharp as the edge of a blade. Every exhale becomes a small cloud that drifts away and disappears. The elephants move slowly, each step heavy and deliberate. Their tusks gleam pale under the milky light, and from their flanks rises a thin mist, steam meeting snow. They look impossibly out of place, ancient creatures of heat and dust walking through a frozen sky. Yet they move forward without complaint, led by quiet handlers whose voices are nearly lost in the wind. Somewhere ahead, Hannibal rides, his cloak pulled tight against the cold. For days, he has spoken little. His eyes stay fixed on the horizon, where the mountain ridges fold endlessly into one another, a labyrinth of ice and stone. People say he does not sleep, that he watches the stars at night as if tracing an invisible path among them. His silence is not emptiness, it is focus, a stillness that seems to draw even the wind around it. You stop for a moment beside a narrow stream frozen in motion, the ice catching a faint blue glow from the sky above. A few soldiers break off small pieces to melt for water, their movements slow, careful. Somewhere, a horse neighs softly, answered by the low rumble of an elephant. It's strange how even the smallest sounds carry so far in the thin air, each note, each breath, echoing like a whisper across centuries. They say no one truly knows which path Hannibal took across the Alps. Historians still debate it. Some point to the Colonel de la Traverse, others to the little St. Bernard Pass. But the truth, perhaps, is less important than the feeling of the journey itself. A man and his army moving through a realm where even the earth seemed to test their resolve. Snow begins to fall again, fine and slow. It settles on helmets, on cloaks, on the rough skin of the elephants' backs. The flakes melt quickly where they touch warm flesh, leaving tiny dark patches that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Time feels suspended. The mountains, ancient and indifferent, watch in silence. At night, the camp glows with faint fires sheltered behind rocks. The smoke rises in thin spirals, vanishing into the low clouds. You hear the soft murmur of men sharing what little warmth they can, the sound of hands rubbing together, of quiet laughter carried on the wind. No songs, no boasting, just endurance. Just the soft crackle of firelight reflecting off snow. Hannibal walks among them sometimes, saying nothing, offering only a nod or a brief look. His presence steadies them more than any speech could. In the flicker of firelight, his face seems carved from the same stone as the peaks above. Once, during a storm, a rockslide blocks the narrow pass ahead. The men work in near silence to clear it, shovels scraping stone, the air filled with the faint hiss of falling snow. Hannibal watches, then steps forward. Without a word, he picks up a broken tool and joins them. The soldiers glance at one another, but say nothing. The act speaks for itself. Even mountains can be moved, one stone at a time. By the fourth week, the cold has become a living thing. It seeps into armor, into thought. Bread hardens like stone. Leather stiffens. Yet somehow the march continues. Each dawn feels both a beginning and an ending. The same pale light spilling over new valleys, new challenges, new silences. You notice small things. How the snow seems to whisper when the elephants pass. How the clouds move slower at this height. How even breath itself feels sacred here. The journey has become a kind of meditation, each step an offering to something greater than victory. There are nights when the wind sounds almost like voices, low and rhythmic, like a forgotten chant. Some of the younger soldiers say the mountains are speaking, that they carry the echoes of older armies who tried and failed before. Hannibal listens too, head slightly tilted, as if he can understand. Maybe he does. Days blur into nights, nights into days. The army loses men, animals, supplies, all claimed quietly by the mountain. No cries, no laments. Just snow covering what has fallen, smoothing every trace. The living keep moving forward, always forward. And then, one morning, the light changes. The air softens. You hear the rush of water, not frozen, but flowing. The path widens, and the mountains begin to open. There is grass, actual green, showing through the melt. A hush falls over the column. Someone laughs softly, disbelieving. Hannibal halts at a ridge, standing against the light. Below him lies the plain of Italy, golden and wide, spread out like a promise kept. His eyes, weary but calm, reflect both exhaustion and something deeper. Vindication, perhaps, or simply relief. Behind him, his army gathers, thousands fewer than before, yet stronger for it. They stand in silence, the weight of their passage heavy in the air. Snow still clings to their boots, but the sun warms their faces. Silence lingers on the mountain until one elephant releases a soft, weary trumpet, a sound that drifts like a sigh into the valley below. Hannibal stands still, eyes closed, as the wind shifts, carrying the scent of pine and distant earth. The Alps, cold and unyielding, have finally let him pass. Around him, the world feels immense and timeless, a silence carved by endurance, the kind history overlooks, yet never forgets. And somewhere within that stillness, between the breath of the wind and the pulse of stone, destiny exhales, quiet, patient, and waiting to awaken. Morning comes pale and cold, a kind of morning where breath turns instantly to mist and the horizon dissolves into fog. You stand by the Trebia River, its surface dark and slow, carrying the chill of winter through its veins. The air tastes of iron and wet reeds. Somewhere across that drifting curtain of mist, two armies wait, each still, each listening to the other breathe. The ground feels heavy with silence. The Carthaginian camp wakes before dawn, quiet movements stirring beneath cloaks dusted in frost. Men tighten straps, polish shields, and whisper brief prayers to gods of both desert and sea. Hannibal walks through them, his presence calm, unhurried. His armor bears no shine, dulled by the cold, and yet his eyes reflect the faint silver of the coming sun. Across the river, the Romans are already moving. Their campfires send up thin columns of smoke that vanish quickly into the gray. They believe the Carthaginians are weak from the Alps, frozen, starving, exhausted. Perhaps they are right. But they cannot see the patience that has settled in the eyes of those who have crossed mountains. The Trebia flows quietly between them, indifferent to ambition. Its banks are slick with frost, its reeds trembling like fine glass threads. Somewhere, a lone Huron lifts into the mist and disappears. The soldiers watch it go, saying nothing. Even the elephants stand motionless, their great bodies steaming faintly in the cold, their eyes deep and unblinking. When the first signal sounds, it is not a trumpet, but a whisper of movement, men stepping into the river. The water bites instantly, numbing feet and legs. Still they wade forward, each step careful, deliberate. The Romans begin their advance too, the surface of the Trebia breaking under hundreds of feet. Ripples collide and merge, the whole river trembling under their passage. You hear it then, the sound of hooves striking mud, faint and rhythmic, like the pulse of something enormous awakening. From behind the low hills, Hannibal's cavalry emerges, shadows against the fog. Their horses move in perfect silence, steam rising from their nostrils like breath from sleeping giants. For a moment, time holds still, two tides of men facing each other, through a river that reflects nothing but mist. Then the fog shudders, as if taking a breath, and the world moves again. The first clash comes softly, not with a roar, but with a dull, heavy sound, like wood meeting wet earth. Shields touch, spears slide. The river splashes quietly under the weight of bodies. You can hear every detail, the creak of leather, the faint clink of metal, the sound of men breathing through clenched teeth. It is not chaos yet. It is rhythm, steady and cold. Hannibal watches from the ridge, his cloak stirring slightly in the breeze. Below him, his men fight with the calm of those who have accepted the day before it arrives. They do not rush. They let the Romans push forward, deeper into the marshy bank, into the cold water that clings to their armor and slows their step. Somewhere, hidden beyond the reeds, a detachment waits, cavalry and spearmen, motionless, their horses' hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Hannibal had placed them there at dawn, when the fog was thickest. Now they wait for a single gesture, a faint signal that will turn patience into motion. The battle swells like the tide, slow and inevitable. The Romans press harder, their formations pushing against the Carthaginian line. The sound grows, not loud but dense, like distant thunder muffled by snow. You can almost feel it through your boots, a deep vibration in the earth itself. And then, from the river's edge, a horn sounds, low, deep, almost mournful. It rolls through the fog, across the water, into every heart that still listens. The hidden force stirs. Horses rise from the mist like ghosts, their riders lowering spears, their armor glinting dimly in the pale light. They descend upon the Roman flank, not with fury, but with inevitability, a motion so smooth it feels like nature reclaiming balance. The Romans turn, confusion rippling through their ranks. For a heartbeat, the air fills with the sound of wings. the sound of every possibility breaking open at once. The Trebia flows on, dark and unchanged. When the mist drifts back, it swallows noise and motion alike. The Romans withdraw. The Carthaginians stand unmoving. No cheer, no triumph, only quiet breath, weary and human. Even the elephants stand still, vast and solemn, as if carved from memory itself. Hannibal walks down to the water. He kneels, scoops a handful of the river, and lets it fall through his fingers. The current takes it without a ripple. Perhaps he wonders, as you do, whether victory can exist without joy, whether silence is the truest sound of war. The fog lifts slowly, revealing what has passed. Shields half buried in mud, spears leaning at strange angles. The river glides past it all, patient and indifferent. By noon, the field looks almost peaceful again. Smoke rises faintly from the distant Roman camp. Crows circle lazily above the reeds. The men sit quietly, eating what they can, speaking little. Their faces are pale from cold, but their eyes carry a strange stillness, the look of those who have seen both death and purpose and found them indistinguishable. Later, as the sun dips low, its light turns the water to silver. Hannibal stands once more by the river, the same wind brushing his hair, the same stillness surrounding him. The Battle of Trebia is over, but it feels less like an ending than a pause, a held breath between chapters of something larger. You watch as the river reflects the shapes of men leaving, horses crossing, elephants moving slowly through shallow water. The reflections stretch and break, dissolve and reform, as if even the river cannot decide which image to keep. And then, as the last soldier disappears into the fog, Trebia returns to its natural state, quiet, endless, flowing toward a sea that remembers nothing and forgives everything. The reeds sway again, the mist thickens, and once more the land forgets. The morning rises pale and uncertain, wrapped in a curtain of mist so dense it seems to swallow the world. The lake lies still, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting nothing but the color of the fog. Somewhere beyond that gray horizon, the Roman army marches, their steps lost in silence, their banners invisible, their faith placed in a road they cannot truly see. Hannibal watches from the ridges above, cloaked and unmoving. Around him, thousands wait in the quiet, men, horses, and shadows blended into the folds of the land. Not a single voice rises. Even the armor has been muffled, the spears wrapped in cloth, so that the wind itself becomes the only sound. The air tastes of pine and damp earth. From here, the world feels hushed, suspended, as if time itself is holding its breath. Below, the Romans continue along the narrow path beside the lake, unaware that the hills around them are alive with watchful eyes. The fog closes behind them like a door. They move in long, disciplined lines, yet within the mist, order begins to blur. The sound of footsteps fades, replaced by the distant call of unseen birds and the faint rhythm of waves touching the shore. It is said that Hannibal spoke little that morning. He stood with his hands resting on the hilt of his sword, his gaze fixed on the mist. Some claim he whispered a prayer to Tanit, the goddess of the moon and fate. Others say he only waited for the wind to shift. And when it did, a single slow movement of air from the east, he gave the smallest nod. That was all it took. From the ridges came the sigh of movement, soft at first, then deep, rolling like the opening breath of a storm. Shapes emerged from the fog, not with haste, but with precision, as though the mist itself had chosen to move. Carthaginian soldiers descended silently through the trees, their steps cushioned by wet leaves, their armor faintly glimmering. On the far side, cavalry began to encircle, their hooves muffled by the damp soil. Below, the Romans saw nothing. Only the whisper of wind reached them, soft, uncertain. Then the hills exhaled. The silence cracked open, slow and deep, like the earth itself releasing breath. From the mist rose the low thunder of horns, rolling across water and stone. It wasn't a roar, but something older, a sound born from patience and inevitability. The fog thickened, folding in upon itself, swallowing shape and distance alike. The Romans turned, but there was no direction left, only shifting shadows and the unseen presence of an army waiting in stillness. The lake was nowhere and everywhere at once. Hannibal's men closed in, unseen but near. The clash of metal came like ripples on water, spreading, folding, swallowed by mist. The Romans, caught between the slopes and the lake, found no line to hold. Their shouts became fragments, fading as quickly as they rose. The water lapped quietly at the shore, indifferent to the struggle so close to its edge. Somewhere above it all, Hannibal watched, his figure a silhouette against the widening sky. To him, the battlefield below looked almost peaceful, a pattern of movement and stillness, of life and echo. He said nothing. His officers waited for orders that never came. The trap had already closed, and nature itself seemed to finish what strategy had begun. The fight did not last long. The fog, which had hidden the Carthaginians, soon hid everything else: victory, defeat, the passage of time. When the mist began to lift hours later, it revealed a quiet so deep it felt unnatural. The hills stood untouched, the trees still wet with dew. The lake shimmered faintly in the returning light. It is said that after the battle, the waters of Trasimene turned dark, not red, but deep bronze, like the skin of aged copper. Yet no ripples disturbed its surface. The air grew soft again, carrying the scent of laurel and cypress. Birds returned to the branches. The hills exhaled their silence once more. Along the shore, broken shields lay half buried in sand. The morning breeze stirred them gently, as if tucking them to rest. The bodies of men and horses were scattered like forgotten dreams, already fading under the pale light. Hannibal walked the shoreline at dusk. The fog had retreated to the far ends of the lake, and the world was painted in hues of silver and ash. His soldiers were cleaning weapons, tending wounds, or simply staring at the still water. There was no celebration, only the soft rhythm of waves against the earth, and the slow creak of leather as men sat in silence. Somewhere behind him, a soldier lit a torch. Its reflection danced briefly on the surface of the lake, then broke apart as the water moved. Hannibal paused and looked out toward the horizon. The sun was sinking, leaving a faint glow across the mist, a line between day and memory. The historians still debate how many Romans fell that day, or whether the fog itself was Hannibal's ally or his luck. Some claim it was divine providence, others pure strategy. But those who stood there, who saw the world vanish in white and reappear in stillness, never forgot how quiet war could be. As night deepened, the lake turned black and glassy, the air cool, fragrant with pine and damp earth. Campfires flickered faintly on the distant hills, glowing like fireflies scattered by the gods' forgotten hands. The men rested where they stood, armor beside them, breath slow and heavy with exhaustion. By midnight, Trasimene had returned to what it had always been, a quiet lake between sleeping hills, a mirror for the patient stars. The wind moved gently through the reeds, carrying whispers too old to name. Mist gathered once more over the water, soft and forgiving, as if the land itself wished to forget. When dawn finally came, no trace of battle remained, only the echo of waves, the scent of cedar smoke, and the boundless hush of a world exhaling in peace. The road turned golden under the late summer sun, stretching endlessly through the heart of Italy. Dust rose in gentle clouds around the hooves of horses and the slow grind of wooden wheels. The army moved like a quiet river, its rhythm steady and patient, a procession of men, elephants, and wagons winding through fields heavy with ripened grapes. The scent of earth and fruit mingled in the warm air, and above it all, A faint breeze carried the hum of distant villages preparing for harvest. No words passed between them now. The echoes of past battles had left behind a silence deeper than fatigue, a stillness carved from memory and dust. Spears caught the fading light, glimmering like pale stars against the dusk, while the soft clink of armor became the army's quiet heartbeat. From above, a lone raven drifted through the cooling air, its shadow gliding across worn faces before dissolving among the olive groves. The men kept walking, their steps measured and slow, bound together not by command, but by the unspoken knowledge that every mile forward drew them closer to destiny's waiting breath. Villagers watched from afar, farmers and shepherds standing beside stone walls, their hands shading their eyes. They did not cheer nor flee. They only observed as the tide of Carthage flowed past their vineyards and over the quiet hills. Perhaps they sensed that history was walking before them, that the world they knew was shifting softly but irreversibly. Hannibal rode near the front, his gaze calm, unreadable. The dust clung to his cloak and to the manes of the horses, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. He carried no map now, only memory and instinct. His scouts returned with quiet reports, paths through the valleys, the presence of Roman patrols, the signs of early autumn in the fields. He listened, nodded, and rode on. Sometimes, as the sun sank low, they camped beside rivers or in abandoned farmsteads. Fires flickered in the twilight, and the smell of cooking grain and pine resin filled the air. The soldiers spoke little. The murmurs that rose were brief and low, like prayers spoken to no one in particular. A few would polish their weapons, others would mend torn cloaks or whisper stories of their homes across the sea. There was a strange peace in those nights, the kind born not of comfort, but of purpose. Even the elephants, restless by nature, seemed subdued. They stood beneath the stars, shifting their weight slowly, their breath rising in pale clouds. Somewhere beyond the camp, the distant cry of a night bird carried through the trees, thin and melancholy. The march resumed each dawn. The roads were narrow, the valleys deep, the hills unfolding endlessly ahead. They passed through groves of cypress and fig, through towns with shuttered windows and wells gone dry. The Roman countryside, beautiful and indifferent, watched them without fear. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. A nameless soldier once recorded that they walked between two worlds, past and fate. The days, he wrote, grew slower, drenched in amber light, as if time itself had paused to listen. The air carried the faint scent of wild thyme, crushed beneath the steady march of thousands. Armor murmured softly, like rain over stone. Each step felt both familiar and foreign, a rhythm suspended between memory and destiny. No one knew where the road would end, only that it drew them onward, through valleys and dust, under skies that seemed to breathe with them, quiet, patient, eternal. Somewhere south of the Apennines, they crossed a valley lined with poplars. The trees leaned slightly toward one another, their leaves whispering as the wind passed through. Hannibal stopped for a moment on the ridge above, his horse restless beneath him. From there, he could see the plains stretching out to the horizon, broad and open, dotted with rivers that shimmered like threads of glass. He dismounted, letting his hand rest on the animal's neck, and simply watched. Behind him, the army slowed to a halt. 1,000 men stood in silence, following his gaze. For a heartbeat, the world seemed motionless. The sound of insects in the grass, the soft murmur of the wind, the distant toll of a bell from some unseen village. And then, with a quiet motion, he mounted again and signaled the march to continue. In the weeks that followed, the Carthaginian column grew leaner. Supplies thinned, men fell ill, but still they pressed onward. They traded with small villages, took water from rivers, gathered olives and figs from the trees they passed. The Romans watched, waiting, but did not yet strike. The land between them became a space of uneasy quiet, a pause in the great breath of war. At night, the stars over the Italian plains burned clear and close. The soldiers lay upon the ground, their shields for pillows, their faces turned toward the sky. Some thought of home, of the sea near Carthage, of the smell of cedar and the songs of markets by the harbor. Others dreamed of Rome, of a city they had never seen, but could already imagine. White stone, proud walls, fires burning at dusk. And somewhere along that endless road, sleep arrived like mist, slow, weightless, inevitable. The hum of insects dimmed to a gentle rhythm. The wind eased into silence, and the stars blinked softly above the weary camp. The soldiers rested beneath worn cloaks, their breath sinking with the pulse of the earth. Between memory and destiny, they drifted, neither awake nor dreaming, only suspended in the quiet grace of exhaustion. In that fragile stillness, even the night seemed to hesitate, holding them tenderly before the dawn's first whisper would summon them onward once more. By dawn, the mists would return, thin veils rising from the rivers, wrapping the columns in light. The march would begin again, the steady rhythm of footsteps blending with the murmur of the land. From afar, it must have looked almost serene, an army not of conquest, but of silence, moving ever southward into history's waiting hands. The morning light spread gently over the plains, soft as breath on glass. The fields of Cannae shimmered like a golden mirror, stretching so far that the horizon seemed to dissolve into haze. Dust hung faintly in the air, drifting in lazy spirals as the wind swept low across the earth. It was not a cruel wind, just patient, carrying the scent of dry wheat and distant rivers. In that stillness, history itself seemed to wait. You stand where Hannibal once did, feeling the air press lightly against your skin. The silence feels alive, not empty, as if every grain of sand remembers what is about to unfold. Hannibal stands at the center of the vast plain, cloak moving softly in the wind, his gaze fixed on the open space before him. His soldiers gather in quiet formation, shields resting on their knees, faces calm, their movements slow and deliberate. Far across the field, the Roman legions prepare, a sea of crimson and bronze glinting in the morning sun. Their banners flutter like restless flames. They are confident, certain of their strength, their numbers vast. Yet even from this distance, you can sense a tension beneath their discipline, the subtle tremor of men who have heard whispers of the Carthaginians' cunning. The air between the two armies feels sacred, suspended in balance. Dust curls upward in soft threads, catching the light like incense. It moves across the plain like a prayer carried on the wind. You can almost hear the low murmur of the soldiers, small talk, a laugh here and there, the clink of metal, the creak of leather straps. Ordinary sounds, fragile against the vastness of the coming storm. Hannibal walks slowly along the line of his troops. His steps are unhurried, his expression calm. He speaks to no one for a long while, as if listening to something far beyond the noise of men, perhaps to the rhythm of the earth itself. Then quietly, he points to the center of the plain. That is where the Romans will strike. That is where they will break themselves. Historians still debate whether his plan was pure instinct or genius born of long calculation. The way he positioned his troops, using the natural curve of the land and the angle of the morning sun, it was almost as if he painted the battlefield with patience and precision. The wind blew from behind his men, carrying dust toward the Romans, blinding their sight, masking his movement. The sun rose behind him, its glare falling into Roman eyes. Even the shadows obeyed his design. The Carthaginian soldiers adjusted their formation. The center, thinner and more flexible, curved gently outward like a bow drawn in readiness. The cavalry waited quietly on the wings, their horses stamping softly, tails swishing at the flies. The elephants, few but imposing, stood further back, their great ears moving like sails catching invisible tides. The entire army breathed as one. Hannibal raised his hand once, not as a command, but as a gesture of stillness. Around him, thousands watched, motionless. The morning grew brighter, and the air trembled faintly with heat. In the far distance, the Roman horn sounded long, low notes that rippled across the plain like thunder rolling over water. There is a strange peace in moments before chaos. Even the birds seemed to vanish from the sky, as if unwilling to witness what was to come. Hannibal's eyes narrowed. He did not look at the Romans directly. Instead, he looked past them, as if already seeing the day's end. The plain of Cannae was not a place of grandeur then, just earth, wind, and light. Yet every element seemed to align, as if the world itself was complicit in his design. The Romans advanced in dense formation, their armor flashing like mirrors. The ground trembled faintly beneath their steps. Hannibal's men waited, breathing slowly, dust rising around their feet. A soldier near the front whispered a quiet joke, something about how the Romans would need bigger sandals for all this walking. A few chuckled softly, not from humor, but to ease the weight of waiting. Even Hannibal smiled, briefly, that small, unreadable smile that seemed to come from another world entirely. Time stretched thin. Each heartbeat felt deliberate, measured. The distance between the armies closed inch by inch. The plain that had seemed endless now felt intimate, almost close enough to touch. The smell of iron and sun-warmed dust filled the air. You can imagine the sound, not of battle yet, but of breath, of shifting armor, of wind brushing across leather. You can feel the anticipation, like the pause between lightning and thunder. And in that fragile space, Hannibal simply stood still. The Romans believed they faced a weary enemy retreating into open ground. Hannibal had given them exactly what they wanted to see, a line that would yield. But behind that softness waited precision. Every man in his army knew his place, knew the signal, knew the rhythm of what was coming. When the first Roman ranks reached the center of the plain, the sun had climbed higher. Its reflection danced off shields and helmets, bright enough to sting the eyes. The dust, caught in light, turned golden. Somewhere behind, a Carthaginian banner lifted gently in the breeze, its fabric rippling like fire. The land seemed to lean forward, waiting. For now, silence reigned, fragile, sacred, too perfect to break. Across the golden plain of Cannae, two armies stood in stillness older than language itself. Hannibal closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind carry the scent of wheat and sun. Perhaps he smiled, sensing the world's balance tremble. When he opened them again, light shimmered along the horizon like a promise. The earth held its breath, and time itself seemed to pause. Poised between memory and fate, on the edge of something history would never forget. A day had ripened into gold, the air trembling with heat that shimmered just above the ground. Dust lifted from the earth in small, swirling ghosts, rising and falling like smoke from incense. You can almost smell it, warm, dry, and ancient. The plain of Cannae no longer felt like land, but like a vast altar. Upon it stood thousands of men, breathing in unison, hearts slow and steady as if guided by one shared rhythm. There was no shouting, no chaos yet, only that quiet pulse of inevitability. The Romans advanced first, their heavy ranks pushing forward in perfect formation. Shields locked, spears braced, they looked unstoppable, a wall of bronze and flesh. Each step shook the earth softly, like a great heartbeat echoing through soil. You can imagine the faint rattle of their armor, the collective exhale of soldiers moving as one living organism. It was beautiful in its precision, even serene, if you ignored what it meant. Ahead of them, Hannibal's center line, thin, curved outward like a bow, began to bend. The Carthaginian soldiers moved slowly backward, not in fear, but with the grace of a tide retreating. Dust billowed around their ankles, golden clouds drifting in the morning sun. To the Romans, it looked like victory. To Hannibal, it was the drawing of the circle. You see it forming, almost imperceptibly, the slow curving motion as each flank of the Carthaginian army holds firm while the center yields. Like hands folding around a flame, the shape begins to close. The Romans, driven by confidence, push deeper, pressing their weight into the narrowing space. The noise rises, the clash of shields, the sharp hiss of breath, but still there is no chaos, only rhythm. Every motion feels deliberate, meditative. The Carthaginian soldiers exhale as they strike, inhale as they retreat. The dust glows around them like candlelight. The Romans advance further, compressed by their own numbers, unaware that the ground beneath them has become a labyrinth. Hannibal stands at the rear, watching as the design unfolds. He does not shout orders. He barely moves. The sun reflects off his armor, and for a moment he seems more statue than man, a figure carved by patience and intention. Near him, a scribe quietly records something in wax, perhaps not tactics, but impressions. The circle tightens. The air holds its breath. Some historians still debate whether Hannibal anticipated the Roman movements perfectly or simply allowed their momentum to seal their fate. Yet when you watch it play out in your mind, it feels less like strategy and more like art. The battle breathes, expanding and contracting, pulling inward like lungs filling and emptying. The Roman lines, once proud and broad, now fold inward, pressed by invisible walls of dust and silence. The Carthaginian cavalry, moving like shadows on both wings, begin their long arc around the edges. They disappear behind the Roman rear, their movements quiet as drifting smoke. You can almost hear the soft thud of hooves, the leather reins creaking, the murmured prayers of riders who know what is coming. Then, without warning, the circle begins to close. From both sides, Carthaginian cavalry surge forward, their charge a low, rolling thunder that swallows the plain. The sound isn't a roar, but the deep breath of fate exhaled. The Roman ranks, packed too tightly to move, find themselves enclosed by a living wall of men and steel. The air grows heavy, thick with dust and heat, trembling with the rhythm of countless hearts. For a moment, the battlefield becomes one vast pulse, metal, dust, and silence merging into a single breath that seems to belong to the earth itself. Yet even now, in the stillness between blows, there is beauty. The sunlight catches the dust, turning every movement into a shimmer of gold. The world looks slow, softened, almost dreamlike, a place where time hesitates. You can almost imagine the wind, curious, pausing to watch. The circle tightens further. From above, it would look like a coil of fire, bronze glinting in sunlight, red crests and banners waving like tongues of flame. The Romans, trapped, can no longer move freely. Every direction is blocked. The Carthaginians press inward with quiet persistence, their breathing steady, their discipline unbroken. Somewhere amid the press of bodies, a soldier murmurs a prayer. Someone else drops their sword, too tired to lift it again. There are no heroes here, only endurance. Even the elephants, restless at the edges, sway in rhythm with the march of men. Hannibal does not smile. He watches as the circle tightens one final time, slow, precise, inevitable. His hands rest on the pommel of his sword, not in triumph, but as if anchoring himself to the moment. The air grows heavier, the light harsher. The field has become a furnace. The wind stops. For a long time, nothing moves except the drifting dust. Then, quietly, almost mercifully, it is over. The noise fades to breathing, the movement to stillness. The circle stands closed, perfect, unbroken. In the center lies the heart of Rome's pride, now silent beneath the weight of the day. Cannae is not remembered for blood, though there was much of it. It is remembered for balance, for the way one mind shaped chaos into calm, turning destruction into something strangely harmonious. The historians write of it as one of the greatest tactical masterpieces ever conceived. But if you linger here long enough, after the echoes fade, you might sense something deeper, not the memory of battle, but the quiet weight of stillness itself. The sun drifts lower, its light turning gentle and gold. Dust hangs in the air, slow and weightless. A lone hawk circles above the quiet plain before fading into the haze. The world seems to breathe again, soft, weary, eternal. Some say even the wind paused that day, listening as history turned a silent, fateful page. Evening descended slowly, like a veil drawn across the face of the world. The plains of Cannae glowed beneath the dying sun, not red, not violent, but gold, as if the earth itself wished to soften what had been done. The wind moved lightly through the stubble of trampled grain, brushing past broken shields, quiet bodies, and the faint shimmer of dust that still hung in the air. For a moment, the battlefield looked like a painting, motionless, suspended between glory and grief. Hannibal walked among the silence. His armor caught the last light, turning bronze to amber, steel to dusk. Around him, the sounds of the living were few. A murmur from the wounded, the clatter of a distant chariot wheel, the low sigh of the wind. Victory had been absolute. Yet in its perfection, it felt strangely hollow, a circle too flawless to hold warmth. The soldiers did not cheer. They moved quietly, tending to horses, lifting the fallen, speaking only when necessary. Some knelt beside their comrades, whispering the old prayers of Carthage, words not of triumph, but of release. Others simply stared toward the horizon, where the sun was melting into the sea of dust. As if waiting for the world to breathe again, history would later call Cannae one of the greatest victories in the art of war. But here, in this moment, it did not feel like art. It felt like weight, the kind that settles deep into the bones. Hannibal's shadow stretched long across the ground as he stopped beside what once had been the Roman front line. A broken spear lay at his feet, half buried in the soil. He bent slowly, picked up a handful of earth, and held it to the light. The soil was warm, clinging to his fingers like ash. He let it fall, watching as the grains caught the breeze and drifted away. It was perhaps his only gesture, quiet, almost ritual. Later chroniclers would say he returned the victory to time itself, refusing to own what could not last. The wind took the dust, carrying it toward the west, toward Rome got behind him. The campfires began to bloom, small circles of flame flickering across the plain, like stars reflected on earth. The men gathered around them, silent or murmuring softly in their own tongues. Libyan, Iberian, Numidian, Punic, a mosaic of distant lands bound by a single man's command. They had followed him across mountains, through frost and hunger, and now across the warm plains of Italy. And though they had triumphed, none could yet see what lay beyond. Hannibal stood apart, on a rise overlooking the field. The wind lifted his cloak, carrying the faint scent of smoke and crushed grass. Somewhere below, an officer approached and waited, uncertain whether to speak. Hannibal did not turn. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sky burned faintly orange before deepening into indigo. Rome will remember this, the officer finally said. Yes, Hannibal answered, his voice low, almost thoughtful. But memory is a double-edged thing. He said nothing more. The officer bowed and withdrew, leaving him alone again with the evening. The sounds of the camp were distant, the crackle of wood, the shifting of armor, the quiet hum of men too tired to dream. Beyond them, the plain of Cannae stretched into darkness. Vast and still dot in the fading light, the battlefield seemed almost peaceful. The outlines of the fallen blurred into the earth, returning slowly to the silence from which they had come. The river murmured nearby, carrying the reflections of the first stars. Even the wind moved softly now, no longer sharp but tender. As if trying not to disturb the sleep of the dead, Hannibal knelt beside one of his elephants, a great, weary creature whose tusks were streaked with dust. The animal swayed gently, its breath warm and slow. He placed a hand on its side, feeling the steady rhythm beneath the skin. For a moment, he thought of the Alps, of the long road that had led them here, the white peaks, the ice, the whispering winds. All that endurance, all that silence, now distilled into this golden evening. He wondered, though he would never admit it, aloud, whether destiny was a path or a burden, whether this victory was an opening or a closing. The gods had favored him today. Of that there was no doubt. But what they had given, they could as easily reclaim. He knew the Roman spirit, unbroken, implacable, would not yield so easily. And perhaps, somewhere deep within, he did not wish it to dot as the night deepened. Torches flickered like slow-moving stars across the plain. The scent of oil and smoke mingled with the faint salt of the wind. The men ate, prayed, and slept. Hannibal remained awake, his thoughts walking farther than his body ever could dot in later years. Poets would imagine this night as one of triumph, a commander at the height of power, standing above his conquered foe. But the truth, whispered across centuries, is softer. Hannibal did not celebrate. He simply watched the wind moving through the grass, the sky folding into shadow, the fires dwindling one by one. When the last light faded, he knelt and pressed his palm to the ground. The earth was cool now, damp with evening dew. For you, he murmured, to whom none could say. To Carthage, to time, to the silence that follows victory. Then he rose, turned his back to the field, and walked toward the dark line of hills dot behind him. The plain of Cannae exhaled at last. The fires flickered. The wind resumed its quiet song. And in that fragile calm, that moment when the world seemed to hold its breath between history and forgetting, one could almost believe the gods themselves had paused, watching as a man carried both triumph and sorrow into the night. Night settled gently over the Carthaginian camp, spreading across the vast plain like an exhalation long withheld. For the first time in weeks, the air was free of steel and shouting, no echo of commands, no clash of arms, only the slow rhythm of the wind weaving through the rows of tents. It carried with it the mingled sense of oil, parchment, and the faint sweetness of crushed grapes. Fires burned low, their embers glowing like small buried stars. Beyond the camp, the fields of Cannae shimmered under the moon. Their dust turned pale silver in the stillness. Inside one tent, Hannibal sat beneath a swaying lamp. Its flame flickered with the pulse of his thoughts, bending one way, then the other. Around him lay the quiet order of a life spent in motion, maps, scrolls, and warm tools of command. Before him rested a neat stack of parchment, edges curling slightly in the cool night air. Beside it, an inkpot gleamed like dark glass. He had tried to write this letter many times, to the council, to Carthage, to memory itself, but every word dissolved before meaning could take shape. Victory, he thought, had become another kind of silence. Hannibal dipped his pen into the ink. The tip hovered above the parchment, trembling slightly before it found its mark. Slowly, carefully, he began to write. The words appeared in neat lines, deliberate but not detached. He wrote to the council, the same opening as before, the same formal tone. The battle is won. The plains of Cannae lie still beneath our banners. The Roman armies have fallen. Many will not rise again. Yet victory does not feel like thunder, but like snow. It covers everything soft and soundless. He stopped there. The ink glistened, then darkened as it dried. Beyond the tent, a horse stirred, its soft whinny carrying through the wind. Hannibal looked up. Through the open flap, he could see the stars, cold, distant, eternal. Their light felt older than everything below them, older even than the sea that separated him from home. They shone indifferently upon the ruins of men, upon Carthage and Rome alike. When he returned to the page, the letter shifted, no longer a report, but a quiet confession. He wrote that war was not flame, but silence, living in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before a cry, in the stillness between nations. He wrote of courage and fear, of fleeting mercies history would forget. The pen trembled slightly in his grasp, not from exhaustion, but from that deeper weight, the solemn ache that lingers after all endurance is spent. He thought of the men who had followed him across the Alps, those who had frozen, drowned, vanished in the snow. Faces rose unbidden in the lamp's trembling light, men laughing around fires, men falling into silence. Their names had already begun to fade, even in his own memory. He wondered if Carthage remembered them, or if the city had already buried them beneath the smooth, triumphant words of politics. He wrote another line, unplanned, unforced. Even victory feels like silence. The ink spread slightly, the words standing alone in their simplicity. He let them be. They needed nothing more. For a long moment he simply watched the parchment. The air within the tent was heavy with unspoken thoughts, a kind that could not cross seas, a kind that lived only in stillness. He felt a distance stirring within him, not toward his enemies, but toward the city that had made him. He had fulfilled everything asked of him, yet the triumph that Carthage dreamed of felt hollow, unreachable. He reached for another sheet of parchment. This one bore no address, no seal, no formality. He began with only a few quiet words, not for command, but for memory. The sentences formed slowly, drawn from some deep place beyond duty. They spoke to his father, though the name was never written. He wrote of the purpose he had been taught, the purpose that had guided every step of his march. He wrote that purpose, once noble, could become its own prison, a weight that turned victories into chains. He wrote of solitude, of the way greatness isolates, how even glory can feel like exile. His script slowed. The ink began to blot, spreading into small dark blooms across the parchment. He let it happen. The imperfection felt right, as if the words themselves resisted permanence. He paused again, his eyes drifting toward the night outside. The moon had climbed higher, silvering the plain. The tents gleamed faintly, and the shadows between them seemed deeper than before. A few men turned in their sleep. Somewhere, the wind caught the edge of a banner, its whisper almost like the sound of waves. For a moment, Hannibal imagined Carthage, its harbor, its cedar ships, the salt scent rising from the sea. He felt its distance like a pulse beneath the skin. He folded both letters, one for the council, one for no one, and placed them into a small wooden box, unmarked and unsealed. Some truths, he knew, were meant to stay where they were written, guarded by the night that had received them. Extinguishing the lamp, he lay upon the cool earth, the box resting beside his hand. Outside, the fires dimmed, and the camp murmured softly. Men dreaming, beasts breathing, the wind threading through canvas. His final thoughts drifted not to triumph, but to distance, the quiet space between what was gained and what was lost. And within that stillness, a single truth remained. When words fall silent, silence must carry what endures. The wind moved through the camp, over the plains, across the rivers, and into the dark. It lifted softly, carrying with it everything left unsaid, a letter never sent, a confession unspoken, yet somehow already delivered. Evening settled over the ruins of the harbor. The sea, once crowded with sails that glowed like copper in the sun, now breathed softly against empty docks. Wooden hulls lay broken along the shore, their ribs jutting from the sand like the bones of forgotten giants. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and cedar, but also something older, the slow fading of a city's memory dot in the heart of Carthage. Streets once alive with the shimmer of silverwork, and song had grown quiet. The marble baths were empty, their water stilled and clouded. The temple torches that once burned for the gods of Baal and Tanit had dimmed, leaving only the faint outline of soot on stone. The marketplace, once alive with traders bartering ivory and spice, now stood silent, its only sound the distant murmur of the sea, reclaiming what time had stilled. Old men sat before doorways, telling stories that blurred history and memory. They spoke of Hannibal, not as the fierce general who crossed mountains and defeated empires, but as a figure half real, half legend. To the children who listened, his name sounded like a lullaby, a song that rose with the wind and fell with the tide. Some said he still walked the forests of the far north, wrapped in mist. Others swore they had seen him at the edge of the desert, riding alone beneath a dying sun. No one truly knew what became of him after Cannae. The chronicles that once followed his every step grew thin, then vanished altogether. Rumors lingered: betrayal, exile, perhaps a calm acceptance of poison, not from fear, but from weariness. Whatever the truth, it slipped away, swallowed by time's silence. Centuries later, Roman historians would write of him with grudging admiration. They called him the ghost of their empire, a man whose name haunted their triumphs long after his defeat. His legacy endured not in victory, but in the unyielding defiance that had once shaken Rome to its core. Carthage, though reduced to ash, had carved its name into the eternal memory of history. Through him, it had learned how even in ruin, pride could become immortal, and how a single man's resolve could outlast the empire that sought to erase it. Historians still debate whether he truly died by poison or simply vanished into distant forests. Some claim he met his end with calm defiance. Others believe he chose disappearance over surrender. Either way, his fate remains uncertain, a final act of mystery befitting a man who defied empires. By the harbor, the last light of day touched the sea like fire. Fishermen repaired their nets in silence, their hands steady, their eyes distant. The waves rose and fell with a slow rhythm, like breathing, the same rhythm that had carried Carthage from its birth to its decline. A young girl stood at the edge of the water, drawing slow circles in the sand with a reed. Behind her, her grandmother's voice rose and fell like the tide, an old story, worn smooth by time. It spoke of a boy who stood before the gods and swore never to make peace with Rome. The girl didn't understand all the words. Their meanings had thinned across the years. But she listened for the rhythm, for the weight the voice carried. And when the name Hannibal drifted through the air, it moved like sea wind over stone, something ancient, familiar, and still alive, somewhere inland. The ruins of the old citadel still caught the last glimmers of sunlight. The stones glowed faintly, as though they remembered. Weeds crept through the cracks where soldiers had once stood, and in the stillness, one might almost hear the echo of their footsteps, fading and returning like a distant tide. The city seemed to breathe, not with life, but with memory, holding fast to what had once been. When night rose over Barca hill, the stars shone upon windows where small lamps flickered to life. Their flames trembled in the wind, not offerings, but quiet gestures of remembrance. Each light burned against the dark, a fragile defiance of forgetting. Down by the harbor, the waves lapped against the old stones, and the faint shimmer upon the water resembled fires long extinguished. They were said to be reflections of the past, lights that once guided sailors home, now guiding only memory. Carthage had not vanished. Its body might have fallen to dust, but its pulse lingered in the air, in the scent of salt, in the hum of the sea that still carried her name through the currents. The ruins seemed to listen, holding the rhythm of waves that had struck the same walls for centuries. Each gust of wind through the broken gates whispered fragments of language, of vows, of forgotten prayers. At times, when the moon hung high, a faint shimmer rose above the harbor, as if the stones themselves exhaled. The locals called it the breath of Baal, the last warmth of a city that had defied empire and time alike. They would stand in silence and watch the light quiver upon the water. It was not grief that held them there, but reverence. To them, this glow was not the city's sorrow, but its endurance, the proof that even ruin could remember. So Carthage endured, not in marble, power, or empire, but in memory's quiet endurance. Its name drifted through the night, carried by the whisper of the sea. The waves bore its echo across the Mediterranean, weaving it into the silence of faraway shores. Between water and sky, between the passing of centuries, something of Carthage remained, unseen yet unforgotten. Its spirit lingered like a faint flame in the dark, steady and unyielding. Though its walls had fallen and its people vanished, the essence of the city endured, not as ruin, but as remembrance, its light refusing to die. Evening settled over the ruins of the harbor. The sea, once crowded with sails that glowed like copper in the sun, now breathed softly against empty docks. Wooden hulls lay broken along the shore, their ribs jutting from the sand like the bones of forgotten giants. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and cedar, but also something older, the slow fading of a city's memory in the heart of Carthage. Streets once alive with the shimmer of silverwork, and song had grown quiet. The marble baths were empty, their waters stilled and clouded. The temple torches that once burned for the gods of Baal and Tanit had dimmed, leaving only the faint outline of soot on stone. The marketplace, once alive with traders bartering ivory and spice, now stood silent, its only sound the distant murmur of the sea, reclaiming what time had stilled. Old men sat before doorways, telling stories that blurred history and memory. They spoke of Hannibal, not as the fierce general who crossed mountains and defeated empires, but as a figure half real, half legend. To the children who listened, his name sounded like a lullaby, a song that rose with the wind and fell with the tide. Some said he still walked the forests of the far north, wrapped in mist. Others swore they had seen him at the edge of the desert, riding alone beneath a dying sun. No one truly knew what became of him after Cannae. The chronicles that once followed his every step grew thin and vanished altogether. Rumors lingered, betrayal, exile, perhaps a calm acceptance of poison, not from fear, but from weariness. Whatever the truth, it slipped away, swallowed by time's silence. Centuries later, Roman historians would write of him with grudging admiration. They called him the ghost of their empire, a man whose name haunted their triumphs long after his defeat. His legacy endured not in victory, but in the unyielding defiance that had once shaken Rome to its core. Carthage, though reduced to ash, had carved its name into the eternal memory of history. Through him it had learned how even in ruin, pride could become immortal, and how a single man's resolve could outlast the empire that sought to erase it. Historians still debate whether he truly died by poison or simply vanished into distant forests. Some claim he met his end with calm defiance. Others believe he chose disappearance over surrender. Either way, his fate remains uncertain, a final act of mystery befitting a man who defied empires. By the harbor, the last light of day touched the sea like fire. Fishermen repaired their nets in silence, their hands steady, their eyes distant. The waves rose and fell with a slow rhythm, like breathing, the same rhythm that had carried Carthage from its birth to its decline. A young girl stood at the edge of the water, drawing slow circles in the sand with a reed. Behind her, her grandmother's voice rose and fell like the tide, an old story, worn smooth by time. It spoke of a boy who stood before the gods and swore never to make peace with Rome. The girl didn't understand all the words. Their meanings had thinned across the years. But she listened for the rhythm, for the weight the voice carried. And when the name Hannibal drifted through the air, it moved like sea wind over stone, something ancient, familiar, and still alive, somewhere inland. The ruins of the old citadel still caught the last glimmers of sunlight. The stones glowed faintly, as though they remembered. Weeds crept through the cracks where soldiers had once stood, and in the stillness one might almost hear the echo of their footsteps, fading and returning like a distant tide. The city seemed to breathe, not with life, but with memory, holding fast to what had once been. When night rose over Barca hill, the stars shone upon windows where small lamps flickered to life. Their flames trembled in the wind, not offerings, but quiet gestures of remembrance. Each light burned against the dark, a fragile defiance of forgetting. Down by the harbor, the waves lapped against the old stones, and the faint shimmer upon the water resembled fires long extinguished. They were said to be reflections of the past, lights that once guided sailors home, now guiding only memory. Carthage had not vanished. Its body might have fallen to dust, but its pulse lingered in the air, in the scent of salt, in the hum of the sea that still carried her name through the currents. The ruins seemed to listen, holding the rhythm of waves that had struck the same walls for centuries. Each gust of wind through the broken gates whispered fragments of language, of vows, of forgotten prayers dotted times. When the moon hung high, a faint shimmer rose above the harbor, as if the stones themselves exhaled. The locals called it the breath of Baal, the last warmth of a city that had defied empire and time alike. They would stand in silence and watch the light quiver upon the water. It was not grief that held them there, but reverence. To them, this glow was not the city's sorrow, but its endurance, the proof that even ruin could remember. So Carthage endured, not in marble, power, or empire, but in memory's quiet endurance. Its name drifted through the night, carried by the whisper of the sea. The waves bore its echo across the Mediterranean, weaving it into the silence of faraway shores. Between water and sky, between the passing of centuries, something of Carthage remained, unseen yet unforgotten. Its spirit lingered like a faint flame in the dark, steady and unyielding. Though its walls had fallen and its people vanished, the essence of the city endured, not as ruin, but as remembrance, its light refusing to die. In a quiet corner of Alexandria, long after the noise of markets had faded into the sea's hush, a single candle still burned. Its light wavered gently against the marble walls of a small, cluttered study. The man who kept it lit was old, not by years alone, but by the slow weight of thought and solitude. His face carried the calm weariness of one who had spent a lifetime among books, trading conversation for silence. Names no longer mattered to him. Only words did. As the night deepened and the wind brushed softly against the shutters, he leaned forward, dipped his quill into ink, and began to write, steady, patient, as if awakening something time had almost forgotten. The candle's flame bent with the draft, its glow spilling across scrolls and notes piled high like miniature ruins. Each page was a city he had built from memory, a city of stories, of lost battles, of vanished empires. And among those names, Greece, Persia, Egypt, Rome, one name shimmered faintly in the ink, Carthage. He paused over it for a long time. Outside, the night deepened. The stars looked down with the same distant patience they had shown to soldiers centuries ago. The scholar's lips moved silently, tracing words once spoken by poets, generals, and kings. Carthage, he wrote again, as though repeating it could bring the city back to life. The air carried the faint scent of wax and ink, a fragrance known only to those who dwell among parchment and memory. The scholar leaned closer, eyes glinting in the candlelight, and continued his slow, deliberate work. His words told of a city by the western sea, once bright with fire, its ships touching every shore, its voice carried by every wind. He paused, smiled at his own flourish, but left the line untouched. History, he believed, had always needed a measure of poetry. Through the quiet hours, the quill moved steadily across the page, its rhythm merging with the deep stillness of the night. To the scholar, writing was not an act of preservation, but of understanding, a way to listen to what time refused to say aloud. He thought of Hannibal, not as the general of legend, but as a boy standing before the sea, his face salted by wind and promise. He thought of Rome, not as an empire of conquest, but as a restless soul fearing silence more than defeat. The candle burned low, its wax melting into soft, translucent pools, fragments of light solidifying into memory. The scholar watched the flame tremble, as countless others must have done before him, seeking truth within its fragile glow. He knew that history belonged less to certainty than to reflection, and that some questions were never meant to be resolved. In that quiet realization, he understood why Carthage endured, not as stone or empire, but as remembrance. A symbol of all that time could not rebuild. He stretched his hands toward the candle, feeling the soft warmth against his palms. Outside, the wind whispered along the colonnades, brushing past statues of forgotten gods. Somewhere in the distance, waves murmured against the Alexandrian shore, faint, ancient, endless. The sound felt familiar, as though the sea itself was turning pages. Historians still argued whether Hannibal was a strategist of genius or merely the embodiment of Carthaginian pride. The scholar smiled at the thought, having read those same debates countless times, pages heavy with reason and ambition. Yet he believed that truth did not live in triumph or loss, but in the quiet space that lingered between them. Dipping his quill once more, he wrote with measured care. The world remembers the roar of war, but forgets the silence that follows. And it is within that silence that history draws its breath, softly, endlessly, waiting to be heard again. Hours passed like slow-moving stars. The candle shortened, its light dimming, but the scholar did not mind. He found comfort in the rhythm, the scratch of quill, the soft hiss of wax, the murmur of wind through the stone window. The library beyond his room was asleep. The scrolls rested in rows like monks in meditation. The city itself seemed to breathe in unison with him. He paused to sip from a cup of cool water, gazing toward the window. Beyond it, the night sky shimmered, and he imagined the faint outline of distant Carthage beneath those same stars. He pictured her harbor, her temples, her people moving through the streets, not in grandeur, but in grace. And then he realized, perhaps Carthage had never truly fallen. Perhaps she had simply changed form, becoming something lighter, a thought, a whisper, a flame passed between minds. The scholar leaned back, his chair groaning softly beneath the weight of years. With his eyes closed, he could almost hear the sea that once touched Carthage's shore, its rhythm steady, neither sorrowful nor proud, but serene, like a lullaby the world had forgotten to remember. When he opened his eyes, the candle beside him had nearly burned away. Its wavering flame mirrored his own persistence, fragile yet unextinguished. He watched it in silence, as if recognizing in its glow the quiet endurance of all things destined to fade. He set his quill aside, the ink drying in the candle's final warmth. On the page before him, his last line shimmered faintly in the dim light. History, like fire, fades, but its warmth remains. Outside, dawn began to stir beyond the horizon, a soft gray rising over the restless sea. The scholar exhaled, and the flame yielded to darkness, leaving behind only the faint curl of smoke, twisting upward like memory itself. In that silence, between night's end and morning's first breath, the room seemed to hold something more than words. For an instant, Carthage lived again, not in stone or empire, but in remembrance. The sea lies between them, Rome and Carthage, empire and memory. Its surface, endless and serene, conceals the quiet pulse of centuries. Time moves here not as a march, but as a tide, advancing, retreating, erasing, revealing. The waves know every secret, every vow spoken and broken beneath the sun. Beneath their silver skin, the world's old dreams drift, weightless and unhurried. Fishermen speak of strange sights beneath the moon. They say that on still nights, when the water glows faintly with light, shapes appear, the dim outlines of elephants moving beneath the waves. Their steps are soundless, their shadows pale, as if walking once more across a battlefield no longer their own. Some call it illusion, others the lingering echo of a memory too deep to die. No one truly knows. The sea remembers, and memory does not explain that far to the north. Rome still stands in stone and shadow. The marble gleams, but the empire that raised it has long dissolved into dust. Its triumphs are carved upon walls, its victories sung in fading languages. Yet even there, the silence of Carthage lingers, not in monuments, but in the space between them. In every broken inscription, in every forgotten name, the ghost of another world breathes faintly, reminding all who look too closely that conquest is never complete. Time passes differently along the coast, where Carthage once stood. Mornings come softly, gilding the ruins with gold before yielding to the white glare of noon. Evenings descend in silver, the air thick with the scent of salt and thyme. The sea folds itself around the land like a gentle hand, as if cradling the last remnants of a story. What the fire could not consume, time has polished smooth, stones worn into patience, echoes softened into song. Sometimes the wind carries faint murmurs across the shore. They could be voices, or perhaps only the sea speaking to itself. Between gusts, there is a rhythm that feels almost human, a pattern of remembrance, repeating endlessly. Scholars who walk here at dusk feel it in their bones, though they cannot name it. They study ruins, date fragments, trace foundations, yet what they seek lies beyond measure. The true city has become a state of being, existing somewhere between memory and dream. The sea remains the great witness. Empires may rise and fall upon its edge, but its pulse never changes. Rome once looked upon it as dominion. Carthage once saw it as home. Now it belongs to neither. It moves between them, gathering what they left behind, the dust of war, the breath of prayer, the silence of surrender. Each wave folds these remnants into its rhythm, transforming history into motion. In that motion, everything is forgiven, though nothing is forgotten. At twilight, the horizon softens into a haze where sea and time become one. The first stars emerge, trembling above the darkening waves, faint remnants of forgotten cities. The air cools, carrying a hush that seems to still the turning of the world. In this fragile moment, neither past nor present holds sway. Memory begins to wane, and history drifts like mist over the breathing sea, weightless and tender. It is the hour of in-between things, when what was and what endures quietly touch. In the depths, coral grows along the bones of old harbors. Fish glide through the skeletons of ships, their scales flashing like coins once minted for kings. The ocean floor holds what no library can, the unspoken record of life and loss. Pottery, ivory, iron, fragments turned to silence. Each piece is a syllable in a language the sea alone remembers. And still, through its endless motion, it translates them into song. Sometimes, when the moon rises full and white, its reflection drifts across the ruins like a hand tracing forgotten shapes. For a moment, the sea recalls what once was, a curve of stone, the shadow of a tower, the trembling ghost of sails that cut through starlit water. Then the tide turns, soft and sure, and the vision fades. What lingers is not form, but feeling, a quiet awareness that something vast and patient has moved through this place, leaving only the tender warmth of its memory behind. between two empires. The sea endures, impartial, infinite, serene. It holds the ashes of ambition and the breath of remembrance. Rome has become marble and myth, Carthage dust and dream. Yet both survive within its rhythm, not as rivals, but as reflections. One built to last, the other burned to be remembered. In the quiet symmetry of the tide, they are equal at last out, and when dawn returns, the horizon blushes with light. Waves turn gold for a fleeting heartbeat before fading back into silver. The sea exhales, the ruins rest. And time begins again, not forward, not backward, but in circles. Like ripples crossing from one empire to another, the fishermen set out at sunrise, their boats cutting small paths across the calm water. They speak little. Some glance toward the horizon, half expecting to see shapes moving beneath the waves, great, pale shadows that rise and fade like memories. Whether dream or echo, no one can say. But the sea, patient and unending, carries them all the same. And so history drifts, neither dead nor alive, but suspended in the hush between remembrance and forgetting. It moves like the tide, touching both Rome and Carthage, gathering fragments of each into a single rhythm. What was once war becomes whisper. What was once glory becomes dust turned luminous beneath the sea. Between two empires, the past no longer divides. It merges, dissolves, and reforms, soft as breath upon water. In that vast stillness, memory becomes motion, and loss becomes another form of endurance. Time folds over itself, unhurried, eternal, carrying forward what cannot be buried, the quiet persistence of all that once dared to exist and still dares to be remembered. Carthage sleeps beneath the moon. What was once a city of fire now lies folded into the earth, its stones softened by centuries of rain and time. The pillars still rise, but only as ghosts, worn columns that seem to hold not the weight of temples, but of memory itself. Moss creeps across their faces like green breath, gentle and patient. Between the cracks, wildflowers bloom, fragile, nameless things, blooming for no one but the wind. When night comes, it arrives quietly, like an old friend who no longer knocks. The sea hums in the distance, carrying the faint echo of ships that will never return. The waves strike the shore in slow rhythm, a lullaby for ruins. Wind passes through broken archways, whispering in a tongue no one speaks anymore. Some nights, it almost sounds like singing. People still come here, sometimes. Scholars, pilgrims, wanderers with notebooks and reverence. They walk carefully through the ruins, afraid to break the spell of silence. One woman kneels beside a fallen wall, her fingers tracing faint lines carved by forgotten hands. Hamilcar, one name reads. Hannibal, the letters have blurred, their edges eaten by time, yet something of their weight remains. Not power, but persistence. At sunset, Carthage glows. The stones catch fire once more, not from war, but from the sun's last warmth. For a moment, it feels alive again, the wind moving through invisible streets, the air trembling with ghosts of laughter and prayer. But then the light fades, and all returns to stillness. Beneath the earth, layers of ash and pottery preserve the quiet breath of centuries. Archaeologists call them strata, poets dreams. Each layer holds a fragment of memory, a whisper from the past, faint yet enduring. Together they form a chorus of time, voices murmuring through the soil, soft but unyielding. One can almost sense their conversation, rippling beneath the dust, the memory of ships setting sail, of a boy who vowed against an empire, of fire consuming the walls of a city that refused to bow. In that buried dialogue, history still speaks, patient, broken, and eternal. The night deepens. The moon climbs higher, cold and serene. A thin mist gathers around the stones, softening their edges. It is easy to believe that the city is only sleeping, not gone, that if one waits long enough, the sound of markets, chariots, and prayers will rise again with the dawn. But Carthage does not wake. It dreams instead. In those dreams, elephants still cross white mountains. Banners still rise above the plains of Cannae. A young general still stands before the sea, his heart full of promise and storm. The dream does not mourn. It remembers. And in remembering, it lives, somewhere in distant Rome. Marble fractures beneath the same enduring sun. Empires crumble, and cities lose memory of their birth. Yet here, where silence holds dominion, time feels gentle. The ruins do not fight its passage. They yield to it with quiet grace, resting within its endless rhythm, perfectly at peace with their decay. The stars appear, one by one. Their reflections shimmer faintly in puddles, gathered between stones. The constellations have not changed. They are the same lights Hannibal once saw above the Alps, the same fire sailors used to steer home. Perhaps they too remember, or perhaps remembrance belongs only to those who lose. A fox slips through the ancient courtyard, pausing beneath a crumbling arch. For a heartbeat, the moonlight touches its fur, turning it gold, a fleeting shimmer of the city's old spirit. Then it moves on, silent as centuries passing. The night air cools, carrying with it the scent of salt, stone, and faraway olive groves. Somewhere in the ruins, a wall gives way with a faint sigh, as if the city itself were breathing in its sleep. Nothing answers. Only the wind moves, patient and knowing. There is a holiness in such silence, the sacred stillness of what endures without witness. Carthage no longer calls for remembrance. It is remembrance. Its memory has become the landscape itself. Every grain of sand whispers a syllable of its name, and every shifting gust translates its story anew. In this quiet, the city lives, not in glory, but in grace, eternal and unseen. History, though broken, still sleeps within every grain of sand. To those who listen closely, the silence begins to speak, not of conquest or ruin, but of peace. It is the deep, unshaken peace that follows centuries of noise, the quiet that only the forgotten can truly understand. Far to the west, the sea murmurs once more, its rhythm eternal and unchanged. It comes and goes, as it always has, as it always will. The wind carries the faint echo of a city that once stood beside its shore, a city of fire and salt, now dust and memory, yet somehow still alive in the steady breath of the tide, where the past lingers, patient and unbroken dot at dawn. The first light spills across the ruins. The moss gleams, the columns glow pale gold, and for a heartbeat, the world seems to pause between memory and mourning. The wind stirs, carrying dust, salt, and the faint warmth of yesterday. Then the sun rises, and the city sleeps deeper, as if sunlight were only another kind of dream. Carthage sleeps, and the world moves quietly beyond her. Yet within that sleep, something lingers, not a ghost, but a presence, still and unyielding. It does not fade, nor does it call for remembrance. It simply endures, existing beyond ruin and memory alike. Perhaps this is how all cities truly end, not in the fury of fire, but in the gentleness of rest. Not erased, but resting beneath time's slow tide, where silence becomes their final language, and existence softens into dream. In that stillness, Carthage remains, not gone, not forgotten, but quietly eternal. Night descends gently over the coast where Carthage once stood. The horizon darkens, and the last light lingers like a sigh above the sea. The air smells of salt, time, and memory, a quiet perfume that belongs only to places where history sleeps. The sea moves in slow, patient breaths. Each wave rises and folds upon another, like a turning of ancient pages. Soft and deliberate, never hurried. When they reach the shore, They whisper against the stones, a low, continuous murmur that feels almost human. The sound carries through the night, threading itself into the rhythm of the earth. If one listens closely, there are names hidden in that rhythm. Hamilcar, Hannibal, Barca, echoes of lives that once shaped the world, now softened into sound and salt. The waves retreat, and the names fade with them, yet the cadence endures. It is the voice of the sea, patient, eternal, reciting a prayer so old that even silence remembers its words. Above, the stars glimmer like faint embers, remnants of a city that would not yield to oblivion. Their light burns quietly in the vast darkness, a testament to endurance, to memory, to the quiet fire that outlasts ruin and still flickers. Unseen yet unforgotten, in the silence of the night, near the shore, the ruins lie close to the water's edge, their outlines blurred by centuries of tide and wind. Some have long since slipped beneath the surface, where pillars have become reefs and broken foundations. Now cradle coral and seagrass fish drift through shattered archways, their scales catching the light like scattered coins cast by unseen hands. The sea moves around them with a kind of tenderness, both guardian and storyteller, keeping what memory could not. When moonlight spills across the waves, shapes seem to stir, the faint trace of walls, the shadow of towers, the ghost of sails caught in wind. Then the tide turns, and the vision fades. The sea folds everything back into itself, leaving only ripples of silver, soft, fleeting, eternal. They say that at certain hours, when the wind turns from the east, one can still hear the harbor. The faint creak of ropes, the low hum of sailors' songs, the hush of ships slipping into open water. The sea keeps them all, somewhere beneath its surface, stored in the quiet chambers of memory. It does not distinguish between triumph and loss, between those who conquered and those who fell. It remembers everything evenly, endlessly. The moon climbs higher, painting a road of light across the water. Along that path, it almost feels as if time flows backward. The sea that laps these shores is the same sea Hannibal once watched from his childhood garden, the same one that carried traders from Tyre, explorers, wanderers, and warriors. It has seen empires rise and fade, yet it has never stopped moving. Its constancy is its mercy. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a single ship drifts, modern, small, its hull glowing under moonlight. The captain stands at the bow, unaware of the city that sleeps beneath his wake. His ship crosses the same waters that once bore the weight of Carthage's fleet. Beneath him the sea sighs, as though exhaling memories too vast for human keeping. When dawn begins to unfurl its pale fingers across the horizon, the sea blushes with light. Waves catch the first gold of morning, and the mist rises gently, revealing everything and nothing all at once. The ruins are gone, no monuments, no banners, no walls. Only the patient breathing of the tide remains, steady and unbroken. Yet within that rhythm, the story continues, quiet as memory and vast as time. A gull wheels overhead, its cry cutting through the stillness. It dives, skimming the surface, scattering droplets that glint like shards of glass before falling back into the sea. For a moment, the air feels alive with motion, as if the ocean itself recalls how to sing, how to shape its silence into song once more. Along the shore, the retreating tide stirs a few small stones, their soft clatter almost human in its tenderness. Each pebble has been shaped by centuries of waves, worn down, smoothed, perfected through endless patience. There is a lesson in that. Even what is broken can find peace through surrender. The sea does not resist what it loses. It gathers its fragments and folds them gently into its eternal song. By twilight, the horizon melts into a line of liquid silver. The waves slow, the wind stills, and for a heartbeat, the world seems to hold its breath. Beneath that hush lies a sound, deep, resonant, almost kind. Perhaps it is only the murmur of current against stone. Or perhaps it is something older, something remembering. In that quiet hum, history ceases to ache. It simply is, resting at last within the endless. Forgiving rhythm of the sea. The sea remembers, because forgetting has never been its way. It carries the dust of fallen cities, the salt of countless tears, and the fading echoes of promises once spoken beneath its stars. Somewhere in its endless depths, Carthage still drifts, not as ruin, but as reflection, serene and unbroken. When night returns, the moon leans low over the dark water, as if listening for an ancient voice. The waves rise and fall, whispering softly, and once more the name Carthage trembles through the air, faint, shimmering, and then gone. Perhaps the sea never truly forgets. It continues to tell the story through breath and tide, not in words, but in being, in the rhythm that binds all memory to motion. For some things endure not because they are spoken, but because they are remembered. And in that remembrance lies a kind of immortality, a quiet persistence beyond ruin or time, where every wave that breaks upon the shore carries, for an instant, the echo of all that once was. In the quiet folds of history, Hannibal's name drifts like smoke, faint, fragrant, and unending. Centuries have passed since the hooves of his elephants echoed against the stones of the Alps, yet his shadow still moves gently through the corridors of memory. He no longer belongs to war, or even to victory, but to that soft realm where courage and stillness meet, the silence before a choice, the calm before a storm. In classrooms washed with morning light, his name is spoken softly, almost reverently, a distant echo of greatness that still stirs the quiet air. Maps unfurl, and tiny figures cross the painted mountains, students tracing with their fingers the impossible journey of a man who carried both destiny and doubt on his shoulders. They learn dates, places, and outcomes, but something deeper lingers between the lines. A sense that greatness is not always about triumph. Sometimes it is about endurance. On quiet nights, historians bend over their desks, writing beneath the dim glow of lamplight. The air is thick with the scent of ink, wax, and parchment, the fragrance of thought made visible. They return, again and again, to the enigma of Hannibal, his motives, his restraint, the peculiar sadness that shadowed his triumphs. Some call him a strategist, others a philosopher misplaced within the armor of a soldier. Through their pages, a figure slowly takes shape, not the image of a conqueror, but of a listener. He seems to stand at the edge of history, attuned to its deep, unhurried rhythm. Where others rush toward glory or broke under loss, he remains still, steady before time's vastness. In that stillness lies his quiet victory, not over nations, but over despair itself, a defiance shaped in silence. Outside, the ruins of Carthage lie beneath moonlight. The city he once defended now breathes only through wind and stone. But perhaps that is how legacies survive, not through walls, but through the echoes that hum beneath them. A single step on ancient ground can awaken a memory. And in that instant, Hannibal walks again, slow, patient, unafraid. Some say his story should have ended with Rome's triumph. But legends follow a different rhythm. They linger in the hearts of those who ask what if. What if courage was never conquest, but the quiet strength to remain unbroken when the world demanded noise? What if, after Cannae, Hannibal's silence was not surrender, but his final, most enduring defiance, the calm refusal to let history claim the last word? The old writings mention that he loved the sound of rain. During long marches, when storms swept across the hills, he would pause and listen, as if the sky itself were speaking. To his soldiers, it was a small gesture, but to time it became a symbol. Even amidst war, he found space for stillness. Now, centuries later, the rain still falls over the plains where his armies once stood. Grass has grown thick, softening the earth that once trembled beneath iron. The wind no longer carries orders or cries, only the distant hum of the world turning. Nature has claimed what man once divided, and in that return, there is peace. There is a quiet comfort in knowing that the world remembers not only his battles, but his silences. Museums hold his image, marble faces with calm eyes, unyielding yet strangely gentle. Artists paint him in twilight colors, not red with fury, but gold with reflection. Writers, too, linger on his gaze, the look of someone who understood that every victory is temporary, but dignity can outlast empires. If one wanders through the ruins at dusk, when the sea air cools and twilight settles across the stones, the place seems to breathe. The wind moves through the broken arches, carrying a rhythm so faint, it feels almost imagined, a murmur that rises and falls with the tide. Some say it is only the waves against the shore, the mind shaping patterns from sound and silence. Yet for those who pause long enough to listen, something deeper stirs within the stillness. It feels as though the earth itself remembers, as though the remnants of walls, the scattered stones, and the salt-worn air have kept hold of a single truth. Fortune shifts, empires fade, but resolve endures. In that quiet moment, history seems to lean close, exhaling softly, reminding all who pass that memory never truly dies. Hannibal became more than a name. He became an echo of the human spirit, the part that dreams even when surrounded by ruin, that continues to move when the world stands still. His legacy does not rest in conquest or loss, but in the art of standing quietly before eternity. Unafraid to be small in the face of the vast dot in this quiet whisper of legacy, there is no fanfare, no triumphant song, only the soft murmur of time as it folds itself over his memory. Hannibal's story does not end. It drifts, calm and unbroken, like the sea that once carried his dreams beyond Carthage's shores. His name moves through the centuries, not as an echo of conquest, but as a rhythm, steady, enduring. Alive within the vast silence of history. Between the past and the present lies a stillness where his spirit lingers, weightless and unbound. In that space, truth no longer belongs to victory or defeat, but to remembrance itself. For even the greatest among us are but travelers, passing through the world and leaving behind not footprints in the sand, but ripples across the water, ripples that shimmer long after the tide has turned. And there, beneath the slow pulse of time, those ripples remain, faint, luminous, eternal. They speak not of loss, but of endurance, of how a single life, carried by will and wonder, can outlast empires. And in that soft, unending motion, Hannibal endures, not as legend, but as memory made immortal. The night has deepened over the coast where Carthage once stood. The moon drifts high above the water, veiling the ruins in a pale, silvery calm. The sea moves with slow grace, its ripples catching the faint starlight like threads of silk stirred by an invisible hand. Along the deserted shore, the scent of salt mingles with the cool breath of wind. No voices remain, no echoes of the marketplaces or the clash of oars, only the murmur of waves folding endlessly against the stones, as if soothing the dreams of what once was not far in the distance. A small flame still trembles, the remnant of a forgotten fire, glowing softly against the darkness. It burns not with heat, but with remembrance, as though history itself lingers for one last moment. Exhaling gently before yielding to the quiet embrace of the sea, you walk slowly along the sand. The air smells of salt and cedar, the same fragrance that once filled the markets of the great city. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cries, then falls silent. The wind moves through the dry reeds, whispering secrets that no one remembers fully, stories half buried in time, the laughter of traders, the chant of sailors, the rhythm of hammers striking bronze. The world feels suspended, as if even the stars are listening. Carthage sleeps beneath your feet. Its stones are cool and smooth, worn down by centuries of tide and time. What remains are not ruins, but echoes, soft and enduring, like the hum of a forgotten melody. You imagine torches glowing along ancient walls, voices speaking in a language that once ruled the sea, and the scent of warm bread drifting from an oven long gone cold. Every step you take feels like walking through the outline of a dream. Historians say that Carthage burned 3 times, once in conquest, once in memory, and once in forgetting. But here, by the water, it feels as though the city never truly died. Its spirit lingers in the air, gentle and forgiving, woven into the rhythm of the waves. Perhaps the sea has kept it safe all these centuries, cradled beneath the tides, carrying fragments of its story from shore to shore. When you look out toward the horizon, you can almost see it. Faint sails of Tyrian purple drifting under the moon. Merchants and sailors laughing softly, their voices carried on the wind. The city glows once more, not in flame, but in peace. Light spills from the harbor, the temples shimmer, and on the hill of Barca, a single torch burns, steady and unmoving. The gods are quiet tonight, content to rest beside their children. You sit by the shore, the sand cool and fine beneath your fingers, shaped by countless tides before this one. The air is quiet, touched only by the whisper of wind that drifts through your hair, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and distance. Before you, the sea breathes, long, patient, eternal, its surface shifting with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat, too old to name. The fire nearby burns low, its reflection stretching thin across the rippling water. For a moment, it glows like a star caught between earth and sky, then wavers, dissolving into the silver calm of the sea. The night holds it all gently, light and shadow, motion and stillness, as if cradling a memory too fragile to speak aloud. There is no sound of sorrow here, only the soft surrender of things returning to silence. In the quiet, beauty lingers, unadorned. Unclaimed, a quiet grace that belongs not to beginnings or endings, but to the tender space between them, where everything fades and yet, somehow, remains. Somewhere beyond the reach of time, Hannibal's story still drifts. His journey, his silence, his unshaken will, all dissolve into the greater calm that now surrounds you. The sea accepts everything, victories, losses, dreams, and regrets. It has seen empires rise and fall, yet it continues to sing the same quiet song. The song of renewal, the song of rest. You take a deep breath. The air tastes of night and salt and stillness. The stars overhead seem brighter now, closer like scattered embers of that last Carthaginian fire. The world grows softer, the edges blur, and the sound of the waves becomes slower, deeper, the lullaby of history itself. You realize that Carthage never truly fell. It transformed, from stone into sand, from sound into silence, from memory into peace. If you listen closely, the sea still speaks, its voice low and tender, carried by the wind. Rest now, the story endures. The waves withdraw and return, each pulse a heartbeat of the world. You feel it echo within you, gentle and sure. The ocean, the ruins, and your breath move together, one timeless rhythm, serene and unbroken. Now, let your thoughts drift, slow and untethered, like sails dissolving into the moonlit horizon. The sea gathers them gently, carrying them beyond the reach of waking, where dreams and memory share the same tide. Each sound fades into distance, each breath softens, until only calm remains. The fire has dimmed, yet its warmth lingers, held in the sand, the night air, the quiet rhythm of your pulse. Rest now, traveler of forgotten stories. Let the hush of the waves cradle you, their ancient murmur blending with the steady breath of time itself. The world lies still, folded in silver light. The sea remembers every name, every silence. And somewhere beneath the stars, in that vast and tender darkness, Carthage endures, not as ruin, but as glow, a quiet ember of memory resting forever within the tide's eternal song. Good night, my friend. May your dreams flow gently and without end, drifting across the boundless sea of memory where time itself sleeps in peace. End of script. Thank you for listening, everyone.